Before we start with the budget sheet, I wanted to revisit this area once again. And this area is all about your development cost codes or development cost centers, where you can actually come in and update them based on what you think are actually going to be your actual costs. What do you call different things in your part of the world? You might be calling them something else. And they even change from state to state. So, say for example, I'm from Victoria in Australia, and over here we have this thing called reestablishment survey that establishes where the title was, where the title is, and with one property being the location of one property being with respect to its neighbors and the setbacks and all those things. And the same thing in Queensland is known as ident survey or the identification survey. So these things can actually change based on where you are and what they are known as locally, but they are exactly the same things. There you would have something else that does exactly the same thing as, but it's called something different. So make sure that you come in and you put in the details that you're familiar with. Apart from the ones that are in black, just don't change them because they are then hooked up with the numbers. If you do change them, make sure that you spend all that time in here. So it's best actually not to change them because by default in the feasibility application, they get pre-populated with something like that, with something like this. And in future iterations, there's an option where you can actually set them up separately, but I haven't actually rolled it out in the first version, and that can be taken care of later. So the best part is for you to be able to quickly be able to do this, is that when you are doing your feasibility and you start here with your costs and all those details, you can actually come in and change whatever you want to change on this sheet itself, and so that when it gets printed or when you print them, you've got the same details. But these cost codes are there because there is a real-time tracking version that I'm testing at the moment, and I use that to track all my projects, and my projects are always tracked. They might be just some transactions may not appear only as long as they don't appear in my bank account. So as soon as I've got them in my bank account, they are all here. So just make sure that you've got these details right. So let's dive into it now. So the first section here, and I can actually collapse all of them, expand all row groups, or I can click on them and go collapse all row groups, and then it collapses all the main heads for me, and so that I can look at them a lot easier. The same thing happens in the international version as well. I can right click and collapse all of them, and they're all collapsed. So let's look at each one of them one by one. So let's just open up revenue. So in revenue, we've got three sections. We've got revenue from residential units, and revenue from commercial units. Now, the best part is that the residential units and the commercial units, if you customize the construction and sales and put in details over here, so let's say I call it test unit 1, they get translated into the budget sheet automatically. So you'll see that they're all picked up from that sheet. So if you wanted to customize them, they're black over here so that you don't really need to do anything. Once you've done that, and once you've selected the GRV method, the same values get carried over in the budget sheet. So area 1, we'll just leave that as it is and go back into our budget sheet. So we've got everything there, and because this is just a sale value, there's one cost code for it, which is 9051. And if I go back here and look at what that 9051 is talking about, 9051 is my residential unit sales. Now they might be different units, but they all fall under the same cost code. So these are the things that you have to be careful of. So in the revenue other, you've got different cost codes, and you can go back and have a look at your sheet and see what they are. So this is for the time that you might earn some income whatsoever from the development before the actual sales of the unit. So you might rent it, you might earn an interest on it, you might sell some chattels, or you might sell the house, you can move the old house and so on. So if you expect to make some income from it, you can add that income over here. Now again, there is a stage. So up top you've got stages, and you've got to select at what stage you're going to do going to make that income. Now in this scenario, I usually say that I usually leave this kind of income from start to finish, because this is the most important thing in this. The first thing that we did when we were trying to figure out what this feasibility was and what it would do, was that actually figure out what stage and what uh, planning stage, when is it going to start, when is it going to stop, and when the other stage will finish or the other stage would start, and so on. So this is important. It will have no effect on your financial feasibility, the calculations that you will get here once I click on the add-on and select update values. It'll have no effect over here at all. However, these details have to do with your stage start and stage finish, and they are just there so that you can allocate them in a much better way. If you didn't want to use any one of them and you had nothing, then anything that you put in your start month and span would only affect where they get posted, based on what you've allowed them to be posted into. However, let me show you another example where it's all these details are actually filled out. So in here, all this will depend upon, if I put in 112 and the 28,600, which is basically the rent that I'm planning to get, or I'm expecting to get from this development. It will get posted here based on the 12 months, and all my details are going to be there. Now, when you're using the add-on, you don't have these values. These calculations are not there at the moment. So you just start by assuming when and what different revenue items are going to be, what you're going to make from them, and whether or not they have GST. If you're using the international version, that is, you don't have to select that. I'll just open that up in the international version, and there are no sections for GST for you to select. All these cells are left blank. You can just simply select what the total value is going to be. You can select the method, the forecast method that you're going to use, whether it's going to be an S-curve or a straight line. Now we've discussed that. We'll actually discuss these details in another video. And once we start allocating them, you can set the month start date, which is automatically linked to your stage start. So if I change this, for example, if I select that and I select town planning, you'll see that town planning, based on what I allowed for on my dashboard, actually starts in the 4th month and spans and ends actually in the 13th month. And how do I know that? So you can go and see town planning. You've got a stage start date over here. And if I keep going and I see that my town planning actually ends in the 13th month over here. So this is what it is telling you. If you see an error over here, it means nothing. It has no impact on the calculation whatsoever. If you see an error in the stage start in any of these orange columns, these orange columns are there just to help you as a guide, so you can allocate your cost in the stages that you are actually meant to allocate them. Now, once you've got these details, all it is telling me that if I go 4 and it spans for another 12 months, it's going to go beyond this. So in this scenario, all I have to do is change that to maybe 11, and you'll see that this error is this error will get fixed once it gets updated, because see, it is still outside the stage, and that's why it'll keep telling you unless I put in something that falls within my stage end date. So if I go 9, it'll be okay, but if I go 10, it'll go past. But in this scenario, it's not counting the month that it's actually going up from. So the moment I put 11, that's when it'll start giving you an error that, okay, you can start that from, because this is town planning, you can't start it before. So if I was to change this Usually this column J you will never have to change, because I've already automatically by default linked it to the stage start date. The moment you select your stage over here, these details will get updated automatically. What you'll have to change is the span months, which is so that you can allocate the cost better, so that they can then be allocated. So now in this scenario, that's why for these kind of costs, I actually leave it to start to finish. That way I can actually make it start the day I want. So when I come in here, I can override this. So all this is telling me that it's linked to this, so that it's by default it's telling me that's there. But because it's blue, I have this option to actually come in and override this section and say no, it'll probably start in the third month, and from the third month I'll rent it out for 10 months. And that way I would know that I can, when the costs actually get calculated, or when I press my update values, these costs get calculated over here. Now, it is not a good practice to actually change one thing and then update, and then change one thing and then update again. It just takes a lot longer. All the values have to go back to the cloud, calculations then have to take place, and then they have to come back. So it is better to actually make your assumptions, put in everything, put in all your input in one hit, and then move on and press the update field. And then if you don't like something, you can always go back and tweak it and then press the update again. So this is one thing that I want you to be careful of. So let's look at this option again. We've got revenue, we've got other, we've got gross revenue, we've got if whether or not it has GST, you've got to select that. It automatically calculates your GST amount and the ex-GST amount, and you can select your forecast method. We've discussed that in one of the videos before. And then you've got the start month and the span month that automatically gets selected based on your stage that you have selected, and your stages you define in your dashboard. So I'm kind of repeating myself, but a lot of people forget this. And I sometimes, while I'm doing this, I make a mistake and then I see all kinds of errors. For example, in my dashboard, 2 of my stages will start on the same day. Now, when I come into my budget, the moment I put in those details in my dashboard, you'll see that they get allocated over here dynamically based on formulas and everything. But if there is a stage if there are 2 stages starting on the same month, there's only space for one over here. And if they get allocated in one stage over there, then you'll have to then it won't be there. And when you select one of those stages, it wouldn't know where the start date is. And once it doesn't know what the start date is, it's going to give you an error. But don't get spooked by this error, because the errors that you will see in the orange columns or in the time and sum column have no impact on the calculations whatsoever. They'll just be picked up on based on where you actually forecast them to start and forecast them to span. They have no, this is only, so these columns from L, M, O, and P, they are just there to help you as a guide, so that when you post these values and forecast them, you forecast them in the right time span that you have allocated for them in your dashboard based on your timeline. And hence the reason this timeline is very important, because based on this timeline, when you get your summary, you can actually get a breakdown of all the costs and the developer's equity that you will need based on each of these stages. If you get those timelines wrong, you will not be able to get these correctly, and these values will not be accurate. And then you'll just have to go by what your sheet says. But even then, it's not wrong, in the sense that your values by stages could be wrong. But if you go into your budget and you come back down and you look at your cash flow, your values based on the monthly allocation are going to be exactly the same. They're going to be accurate. So if you just want the cash flow by month, you don't have to follow the stages. You'll see a few errors and everything, and then you can just simply ignore them. However, I like to see them. This is like an extra option I wanted to give to everybody, that they can actually see, because in real life, you don't get developers equity and you think, okay, what are my expenses next month? Okay, I've got to arrange $70,000. You you divide everything into stages, and from those stages you can actually see that, okay, if I get to this stage, I need X amount of money as developers equity. To get to the next stage, I would need X amount of money as developers equity. It just gives you a better understanding of your development and the cash flows required to fund that development. So just be careful with that. So let's go back into our option over here. So this is the international version. Again, as you can see, there's no GST on these sides. So basically, when entering your revenue, everything is actually already done for you. Everything in black you don't have to worry about. All you have to worry about is the blue cells. Blue cells are what? There's stages, there's cost code. It already comes pre-populated, and if you've updated the values in your development cost sheet, you don't really need to do anything on this side. You just have to come in, put in the values. If you're from Australia, you have to allocate whether or not it includes GST. Then all these details get allocated automatically. You got your forecast method. These are only for you to allocate the costs based on the timeline. When do you think it's going to start, and what is the span? Now this is not this doesn't tell you that it will be um, it'll be one basically means a one-time payment, and if you've got money allocated here, that gets distributed. So if you watch the video on S-curve construction, you'll be able to understand what each one of these are. Orange columns are basically to give you an idea of when that stage that you've selected here it starts and when that stage ends. The S-curve rate is the rate you actually distribute that across, and the start period and the end period is basically, this is calculated from your stage start and stage end. So if you select whatever stage you select, let's say I select building permit over here, it'll give me an error because my span is outside the timeline, but it'll tell me that it starts on the 1st of May, in the month of May, and ends up in April 20th, and so on. And that's all you need to know. You don't really need to understand or get your head around what's going on in these formulas. You just have to come in and fill in the blue details, and if you've allocated them correctly, all these cells would probably mean they don't mean much for you. So this is for people who just want to understand and allocate every cost, because at the end of the day, your focus should be on whether or not I have covered all the costs that will be allocated or should be allocated for this project or may incur in this project in a certain timeline. So once these details are filled in, you can keep going. In your revenue, in your residential sales, these details automatically come in here. All you have to do in this section is change the straight line, whether or not you're going to distribute that in a straight line or an S-curve. I don't distribute my sales in an S-curve. Straight line is fine. But over here in my stages, I do select my settlement stage, which is the settlement period because they can only be settled after your construction is complete and you've got an occupancy permit or a certificate of occupancy that a building surveyor or some building authority comes in and gives you, okay, the dwellings that you have built are now ready to be occupied by owners, and people can actually move in. So once you've got that, so those settlements won't happen in that area. So based on what you've selected, these details will come in over here and it'll give you what they are. So this okay over here is just like a check for me, making sure that my details and everything is coming out fine. So this is just a check that I've built into the sheet so that it gets checked based on what I've got. So you can expand and collapse this section. You can even collapse this section because usually you don't need this until you actually press the update sheets button. And in here, you just keep going down and you keep scrolling down and you keep putting in the values.